"Will you stay if I undress?" The words hung in the cold night air like a confession, trembling and raw, spoken by a woman whose soaked red silk dress clung transparently to every curve of her shivering body. Victoria Ashford, the brilliant and untouchable CEO that everyone in the city whispered about with equal parts admiration and fear, stood under the dim glow of a streetlight. Her honey-blonde hair plastered against her porcelain cheeks, her blue eyes wide with a vulnerability that no boardroom had ever witnessed. Daniel Mitchell, a 38-year-old widower, with tired hazel eyes and calloused hands that still carried sawdust from the construction site, held her steady as she trembled violently from the cold and the shock of nearly drowning. His old work jacket was already wrapped around her shoulders, but it was not enough to stop the shaking that seemed to come from somewhere deeper than her bones. In the back seat of his beat-up truck, his 6-year-old daughter Emma pressed her small face against the window, clutching her stuffed bunny with worried eyes, watching the pretty lady in the ruined red dress cry in her daddy's arms. What secret was Victoria so afraid he would see if he stayed? Why did the most powerful woman in the city suddenly seem terrified of being truly seen? Before we continue, please tell us where in the world are you tuning in from? We love seeing how far our stories travel, but to understand how they arrived at this moment, we need to go back just 2 hours earlier to a quiet evening walk that would change 3 lives forever. Daniel had taken Emma to the riverbank because it was the anniversary of her mother's death, and this spot along the water had been Catherine's favorite place in the whole world. 4 years ago, Kate had died from complications during childbirth, and the baby, a little boy they were going to name Thomas, had died with her. Daniel had held his wife's hand as the monitors flatlined, had promised her through his tears that he would love their daughter enough for both of them, and had walked out of that hospital a broken man, carrying a newborn girl who would never know her mother's face. Every year on this day, Daniel brought Emma to the river, where Kate used to sit and watch the sunset, where they had their first date, where he had proposed on one knee while she laughed and cried and said yes 1,000 times. Emma always brought wildflowers to throw into the water, little offerings for the mommy she could not remember, but talked to every night before bed. "Daddy, do you think Mommy can see the flowers from heaven?" Emma asked as they walked along the muddy path, her small hand wrapped tightly around his rough fingers. Daniel looked down at his daughter, at her curly brown hair that was exactly like Kate's, at the gap-toothed smile that made his heart ache with love and grief in equal measure. "I think she sees everything you do, sweetheart. I think she's watching you right now." And smiling. "Do you think she knows I got a gold star on my spelling test?" "I'm sure she does. She's probably the proudest mommy in all of heaven." Emma seemed satisfied with this answer, skipping ahead to pick more wildflowers, while Daniel followed slowly, his chest tight, with the familiar weight of missing someone who would never come back. Some mornings he still reached for Kate's side of the bed before remembering. Some nights he still expected to hear her humming in the kitchen. Grief, he had learned, did not go away. It just became a part of you, woven into everything you did, everything you were. What Daniel did not know was that 2 miles upstream, a woman in a stunning red silk dress was stepping out of a black sedan, her mind racing with thoughts that had nothing to do with rivers or wildflowers. Victoria Ashford had spent the evening at a charity gala surrounded by wealthy donors and corporate executives who laughed at her jokes and praised her success, while secretly wondering what kind of cold heart beat beneath her designer clothes. She had smiled and shaken hands and made promises about sustainable initiatives, but inside she had felt the familiar emptiness that came from being admired by everyone and known by no one. The red dress had been chosen carefully, a fitted silk number that hugged her figure and demanded attention, paired with expensive red-soled heels and diamond earrings that caught the light. Victoria knew how to dress for power, how to armor herself in beauty so that no one would look deeper. No one would ask questions. No one would ever see the scars she carried both inside and out. But Raymond Cross had almost ruined everything. The senior vice president, a man with silver hair and cold eyes who had been with the company since her father founded it, had cornered her near the bar and made veiled threats about skeletons in closets and secrets that could destroy everything. Victoria had kept her composure, had smiled that icy smile that made men underestimate her, but inside her heart had been pounding with the old familiar terror. She had left the gala early, dismissing her driver at the edge of the park, needing to walk, needing to breathe, needing to escape the suffocating weight of being Victoria Ashford for just a few minutes. The riverbank path had seemed peaceful in the fading light, a quiet stretch of nature in the middle of the city, and she had walked along the muddy edge without thinking about her impractical heels or her expensive dress. That was her first mistake. Her second mistake was letting her mind wander to the past, to a Christmas Eve 25 years ago when she was 10 years old, and the world was still a place where parents tucked you in and promised that everything would be okay. Her heel caught on a root. The mud was slippery from recent rains, and suddenly Victoria was falling, tumbling down the steep bank, her scream cutting through the evening air as the cold water swallowed her whole. The current was stronger than it looked, pulling her under before she could even take a breath, dragging her along the rocky bottom while her expensive dress tangled around her legs and her lungs burned for air. She fought, clawing at the water, but she had never been a strong swimmer, and the cold was already numbing her limbs, making every movement feel like pushing through cement. This is it, she thought. This is how Victoria Ashford dies. Alone in a river while everyone thinks she's at a charity gala. 200 yards downstream, Daniel heard the scream. His head snapped toward the sound, every instinct honed by years of construction work kicking into high alert. He had heard screams of pain on job sites, knew the difference between surprise and genuine terror, and this scream was the latter. "Emma, stay right here by this tree," he said quickly, his voice calm but firm. "Do not move, sweetheart. Daddy has to help someone." "But Daddy, stay here. I will be right back." He ran toward the sound, his work boots pounding against the muddy path, and when he reached the water, he saw her. A flash of red fabric being pulled by the current, blonde hair disappearing beneath the surface, arms flailing weakly. Daniel did not think. He kicked off his boots and dove in. The cold hit him like 1,000 needles, shocking the breath from his lungs, but he was already swimming, fighting the current with shoulders strengthened by 20 years of lifting lumber and swinging hammers. The water pulled at him, tried to drag him under, but Daniel had grown up on lakes, and Rivers had spent summers swimming in water far rougher than this. He reached her just as she went under again, his fingers closing around her wrist, and with a strength born of pure desperation, he hauled her toward the shore. She was not breathing when he pulled her onto the muddy bank. Her lips were blue, her eyes were closed, her beautiful face was pale as death. Daniel tilted her head back, pinched her nose, and breathed into her mouth the way he had learned in the safety courses required for every construction supervisor. He pressed on her chest, counting, praying, begging whatever God might be listening to bring this woman back to life. "Come on," he muttered between breaths. Come on, do not do this." From the path above, he could hear Emma crying, could hear his daughter's terrified voice calling for him, but he could not stop. Could not look up, could not do anything, but keep pushing on this stranger's chest and breathing air into her lungs. 1 minute, 2 minutes, an eternity. And then Victoria coughed, water pouring from her mouth as she gasped and choked and grabbed at his arms with desperate hands. Her eyes flew open, wild and terrified, and for a moment she did not know where she was, or what had happened, or who this man was, who hovered above her with relief, flooding his tired hazel eyes. "You're okay," Daniel said, his voice rough with emotion. "You're okay. I've got you. Just breathe." She stared up at him, this stranger, with sawdust still clinging to his dark hair, and gold flecks in his eyes, and something deep inside her cracked wide open. She was alive. She was alive, and this man she had never met had pulled her from the water and breathed life back into her lungs. Daddy Emma came running down the bank, her stuffed bunny dragging in the mud, her small face streaked with tears. "Daddy is the pretty lady, okay?" Daniel looked up at his daughter, and despite everything, he managed a small smile. "She's going to be fine, sweetheart. She just needed a little help." Emma crouched down beside them, studying Victoria with the curious intensity that only 6-year-olds possess. Why was she in the water? "The water is cold." "I know, baby. She fell in by accident. We need to get her warm." Victoria tried to speak, but her teeth were chattering so violently that the words came out as nonsense. Her red silk dress was ruined, clinging to her body completely transparent in places, and she was shaking so hard that she could not even lift her arms. Daniel stood up and stripped off his old canvas jacket, the one Kate had bought him for his 30th birthday, and wrapped it around Victoria's trembling shoulders. Then, without asking permission, he scooped her up in his arms and began carrying her toward the path. She weighed almost nothing. For all her power and presence, Victoria Ashford was surprisingly small once you got past the armor of designer clothes and icy expressions. "My phone," she managed to say through chattering teeth. "In my pocket. Call my driver." Danielle found the phone, but it was dead destroyed by the river water. "I will drive you," he said. "My truck's just up the path. Let me get you warm." Under the streetlight near the parking area, he set her down, gently, keeping one arm around her to hold her steady. Emma stood beside them, clutching her bunny, her worried eyes fixed on the shivering woman in the ruined red dress. And that was when Victoria looked up at Daniel. Mitchell really looked at him and felt something shift in her chest that had nothing to do with nearly drowning. He was handsome in a rugged, weathered way, with the kind of face that spoke of hard work and honest living. His hazel eyes were gentle, patient, and there was something in the way he held her that made her feel safe for the first time in 25 years. She did not know his name. She did not know anything about him, except that he had just saved her life without asking anything in return. The cold was unbearable. Victoria could not stop shaking, could not feel her fingers or her toes, could not do anything but stand there under the dim streetlight, while her body tried desperately to remember what warmth felt like. Her red dress, the one that had cost more than most people made in a month, clung to her skin like a second layer of ice, and she was suddenly acutely aware of how exposed she was, how vulnerable, how utterly unlike the Victoria Ashford who commanded boardrooms and inspired fear. Daniel's jacket helped, but it was not enough. The canvas was worn soft from years of use, and it smelled like sawdust and something else, something warm and male that made her want to burrow deeper into the fabric and never come out. "We need to get you somewhere warm," Daniel said, his voice calm and steady despite the chaos of the last few minutes. "My truck has heat. I can take you to the hospital or home, wherever you need to go." "Home," Victoria managed through her chattering teeth. "Please, just take me home." He helped her to his truck, an old Ford that had clearly seen better days, but ran with the reliable rumble of a vehicle that was well maintained, despite its age. He opened the passenger door and helped her inside, his hands careful and respectful, never lingering where they should not. Emma climbed into the back seat, still clutching her bunny, her eyes never leaving Victoria's face. "Are you going to be okay, pretty lady?" she asked in that earnest way children have, as if the answer truly mattered more than anything in the world. Victoria turned to look at this little girl with the curly brown hair and the gap-toothed smile, and something in her chest tightened painfully. "I'm going to be fine," she said, and was surprised to find that she almost believed it. "Thank you for asking." "Daddy saved you," Emma said matter-of-factly. "He's really good at saving people. He saved a bird once that fell out of its nest," Emma Daniel said gently as he climbed into the driver's seat. "Let's give the lady some quiet." "Okay, she's been through a lot, But Victoria shook her head slightly. It's okay, she's sweet. Daniel turned on the heatful blast and pulled out of the parking area following the directions Victoria gave him in her trembling voice. As they drove through the city, the warmth slowly seeping back into her frozen limbs, Victoria found herself watching him out of the corner of her eye. His profile was strong, with a jaw that could have been carved from stone and a nose that looked like it might have been broken once or twice. His hands on the steering wheel were large and capable, the hands of a man who built things for a living, who knew how to create something solid and lasting from raw materials. She did not know why she noticed these things. She did not know why she cared. When they reached her building, one of the most expensive addresses in the city, Daniel's eyes widened slightly as he took in the gleaming glass tower with its uniformed doorman and marble entrance. Victoria saw the moment of recognition flash across his face, the moment he noticed the logo on the building, the same logo that appeared on every Ashford development project in the city. He started. Victoria Ashford, she confirmed quietly. Yes, she saw him process this information, saw him realize that the woman he had just pulled from the river, the woman sitting in his old truck in a ruined dress with mascara running down her face, was the CEO of the company he worked for. She was technically his boss, though they had never met in person, and probably never would have, if not for a root and a slippery patch of mud. I work for you, he said slowly. Construction. Site supervisor at the Riverside project. I know Victoria said, though, she did not. Not really. There were thousands of employees at Ashford Development, and she did not know most of their names or faces. But something about this man, something about the way he had looked at her when she coughed back to life, made her not want to admit that. The doorman rushed forward as they pulled up his face, a mask of professional concern, when he saw the state Victoria was in. Miss Ashford, what happened? Should I call an ambulance? I'm fine, Robert, she said, her voice steadier now that she was back on familiar ground. Just a small accident. This gentleman helped me. She started to get out of the truck, but her legs would not hold her. The combination of cold shock and adrenaline crash hit her all at once, and she sagged against the doorframe, unable to take even one step. Daniel was out of the truck in an instant, his arm around her waist, holding her upright. Easy, he said quietly. I've got you. He helped her through the lobby, past the curious eyes of the night staff, into the private elevator that led to her penthouse. Emma followed behind them, her bunny dragging on the marble floor, her small voice asking questions that no one answered. When they reached her apartment, Victoria hesitated at the door. The penthouse was beautiful, filled with expensive art and designer furniture, but it was also cold and empty, and utterly alone. The thought of walking into that silence of being by herself after what had just happened made her chest tighten with something that felt disturbingly like panic. I cannot be alone tonight. She heard herself say the words slipping out before she could stop them. Her voice broke on the last syllable, cracking like ice in spring. Please stay for a little while. Daniel looked at her for a long moment, and Victoria saw the war happening behind his hazel eyes. He was a single father with a young daughter to consider. He was an employee of her company, which made this complicated at best. And there was something else there too, some deep caution that spoke of old wounds and careful hearts. But in the end, he nodded. He called Mrs. Chen his neighbor, who watched Emma while he worked, and the elderly woman arrived within 15 minutes, with the practiced efficiency of someone who had been doing this for years. Emma was sleepy now, exhausted by the drama of the evening, but she insisted on hugging Victoria before she left. Feel better, pretty lady, she said, wrapping her small arms around Victoria's damp legs. I hope I see you again. Victoria looked down at this child she had known for less than an hour and felt tears prick at her eyes for reasons she could not name. Me too, sweetheart, she whispered. Me too. Mrs. Chen's eyes were knowing as she took Emma's hand, studying Victoria with the sharp assessment of a woman who had seen a great deal in her 65 years. Whatever she thought, she kept it to herself, simply nodding at Daniel before leading Emma down the hall to the elevator. And then they were alone. Victoria disappeared into her bedroom to change, leaving Daniel standing in the middle of her living room like a fish out of water. He looked around at the clean lines and quiet luxury, at the view of the city lights spreading out below like a carpet of stars, and felt utterly out of place. Everything here was expensive and perfect, and cold, so different from his small apartment with Emma's drawings taped to the refrigerator and toys scattered across the floor. But then he noticed something. A single framed photograph on a shelf near the window, the only personal touch in the entire room. He walked over and picked it up, studying the image of a young girl with blonde pigtails standing between two adults who were clearly her parents, all three of them smiling with the unconscious joy of people who did not know what was coming. The girl in the photograph could not have been more than 8 or 9 years old, and her smile was so different from the icy expression Victoria Ashford showed to the world that Daniel almost did not recognize her. He was still holding the photograph when Victoria returned, wearing an oversized sweater and soft cotton pants, her usually perfect hair hanging loose and damp around her shoulders. Without the armor of her designer clothes and carefully applied makeup, she looked younger, softer, almost fragile. She saw what he was holding, and her face went pale. That was taken the summer before the fire, she said quietly, crossing to sit on the couch, pulling her knees up to her chest like a child seeking protection. That was the last photograph ever taken of my family. Daniel set the frame down gently and sat beside her. Not too close, but close enough that she could feel his warmth, his solid presence in the cold emptiness of her penthouse. "What fire?" he asked softly. And Victoria, who had never told anyone the full story, who had spent 25 years hiding the truth behind walls of ice and achievement, took a shaky breath and began to speak. But first, she said the words that had been building inside her since he pulled her from the water, the question that terrified her more than drowning ever could. "If you see the scars on my back," she whispered, her voice barely audible, "you will never look at me the same way again." She turned slightly, her hands trembling as she lifted the back of her sweater, just enough to reveal the damage beneath. Deep, jagged lines carved across her shoulder blades and down her spine, the unmistakable marks of burns that had healed badly, skin that had been grafted and scarred and would never be smooth again. Daniel's breath caught in his throat, not from disgust, but from sorrow, from the sudden, overwhelming understanding of what this woman had survived. He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and let his calloused fingers hover over the damaged skin without quite touching it. His eyes were soft with something that looked nothing like pity, nothing like the revulsion she had always feared. "These are proof you survived something unimaginable," he said quietly. "If anything, they make me admire you more." And Victoria Ashford, the untouchable ice queen who had not cried in front of another person in 25 years, broke down and sobbed. The story came out in fragments, at first broken pieces of memory that Victoria had spent a lifetime trying to bury. But once she started talking, she could not stop the words pouring out like water through a cracked dam, unstoppable and terrifying, and somehow also an immense relief. She had been 10 years old on Christmas Eve, the happiest night of the year in the Ashford household. Her father had built a roaring fire in the fireplace, and the tree in the corner of the living room was covered with twinkling lights and handmade ornaments that Victoria had crafted with her mother's help. There were presents stacked underneath, wrapped in paper that Victoria had helped choose, and the whole house smelled like cinnamon and pine and the sugar cookies her mother had baked that afternoon. Victoria had fallen asleep on the couch, too excited about Christmas morning to go to bed properly, and her father had carried her up to her room and tucked her in with a kiss on her forehead and a whispered promise that Santa would come soon. She woke to the smell of smoke. At first she thought it was just the fireplace, the lingering scent of the evening's fire, but then she heard the crackling too loud, too close, and when she opened her bedroom door, The hallway was filled with thick gray smoke that burned her eyes and choked her lungs. "Mom!" she screamed, dropping to her hands and knees the way her father had taught her in fire drills. "Dad!" She crawled toward her parents' bedroom, her heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears, but the smoke was getting thicker, and she could see flames now, orange and red and hungry, licking at the walls of the hallway. The ceiling collapsed 15 feet ahead of her. Burning wood and plaster crashed down, blocking the path to her parents' room completely, and Victoria screamed as sparks landed on her back as her nightgown caught fire, as pain, unlike anything she had ever imagined, exploded across her shoulders and spine. A firefighter found her trying to beat out the flames on her own back with her small hands. He scooped her up and ran, carrying her through the inferno, while she fought him with every ounce of strength in her 10-year-old body. "My mom and dad," she shrieked. "We have to get them. They're in their bedroom. Please, we have to go back." But they did not go back. They could not. The roof caved in while Victoria watched from the front lawn, held back by the firefighters' strong arms, screaming for parents who would never answer. The Christmas tree lights were still blinking in the window when the whole house collapsed inward, swallowing everything Victoria had ever loved. The fire investigator said it was the Christmas lights on the tree. Victoria said, her voice hollow and distant. "Faulty wiring. Nobody's fault, really. Just bad luck." She laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. "I spent 3 months in the burn unit. Skin grafts, infections, surgeries. The pain was, I cannot even describe it. And the whole time I kept waiting for my parents to walk through the door and tell me it was all a bad dream." Daniel did not say anything. He just sat there, his presence solid and warm beside her, his calloused hand resting near hers on the couch cushion, close enough to touch if she wanted to reach out. "My aunt took me in after I was released from the hospital," Victoria continued. "My mother's sister. She had never wanted children, and she made sure I knew I was a burden every single day. She never hit me, never starved me, never did anything that would have gotten her in trouble with the authorities. But she also never hugged me, never told me she loved me, never made me feel like I was anything more than an obligation." She pulled her sweater tighter around herself as if she could ward off the cold of those memories. "I learned to be invisible, to be perfect, to achieve so much that no one would ever have a reason to send me away. I got straight A's, went to the best college, got my MBA, built my father's company into something he never could have imagined. And I never let anyone get close enough to see the scars." "No one?" Daniel asked quietly. Victoria shook her head. "I've had relationships, if you can call them that. Business arrangements, really. Men who wanted the CEO, the success, the money. But I never let any of them see." She gestured vaguely toward her back. "I kept the lights off. I made excuses. I built walls so high that no one ever got close enough to ask questions. Until tonight." Until tonight, she agreed, and there was wonder in her voice as if she could not quite believe what she had just done. "I do not know why I showed you. I do not know why I told you any of this. You're a complete stranger. I do not even know your name." "Daniel," he said, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Daniel Mitchell. But most people call me Danny." "Danny." She tried the name out, let it roll off her tongue. "You saved my life tonight, Danny. You would have done the same." "No," Victoria said honestly. "I would not have. I would have called 911 and waited for someone else to handle it. I would have stayed safe on the shore and told myself that getting involved was not my responsibility." She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw something in his tired hazel eyes that made her breath catch. What kind of person jumps into a freezing river to save a stranger? Danny was quiet for a moment, staring out at the city lights. "The kind of person who knows what it's like to lose someone," he said finally. "The kind of person who promised his dying wife that he would always try to do the right thing, even when it was hard. Your wife." The pain that crossed his face was raw and fresh, even after 4 years. "Kate. Catherine. We were married for 5 years together, for 8 before that. She was the love of my life, and she died giving birth to our second child. Victoria felt her heart clench. Emma's mother. Yeah. Danny rubbed his hand over his face, a gesture of exhaustion and grief that Victoria recognized all too well. There were complications. Nobody saw them coming. She hemorrhaged during delivery, and by the time the doctors realized how bad it was, he shook his head. She died on the operating table. The baby, our son, we were going to name him Thomas. He did not make it either. Cord wrapped around his neck. They tried to save them both, but his voice broke, and for a long moment he could not speak. Victoria reached out without thinking and took his hand, her cold fingers wrapping around his warm ones. Emma was 2 years old when it happened. Danny continued, his voice rough. She does not remember her mother, not really. Just flashes. The way Kate used to sing to her. The smell of her perfume. I've tried to keep Kate alive for her through stories and pictures and visiting her favorite places on the anniversary. He squeezed Victoria's hand. That's why we were at the river tonight. Kate used to love that spot. She used to say the sunset there was the most beautiful thing she'd ever seen. I'm so sorry, Victoria whispered. It was inadequate, she knew that. But what else was there to say? Some mornings I still reach for her side of the bed, Danny admitted. Some nights I still expect to hear her humming in the kitchen while she cooks. Grief does not go away. It just becomes part of you, woven into everything you do. But I have Emma, and she needs me to keep going. So I do. They sat in silence for a while. 2 broken people holding hands in the darkness, connected by losses that had shaped them in ways no one else could understand. And then, just when Victoria was starting to feel something she had not felt in decades, something that might have been hope, Danny's phone rang. He pulled it out of his pocket, frowning at the screen. It's Mrs. Chen. She never calls unless... He answered, and Victoria watched his face change, watched the color drain from his cheeks, and his eyes go wide with fear. I'm on my way, he said, already standing. Keep her comfortable. I'm coming. He hung up and looked at Victoria, and she saw something in his expression that made her stomach drop. Emma woke up with a high fever, he said, his voice tight with barely controlled panic. She's burning up. Mrs. Chen thinks it might be that ear infection acting up again, but she's never seen her this bad. I have to go. Of course, Victoria said immediately. Go! Go now! Danny hesitated at the door, looking back at her with an expression that broke her heart. I'm sorry. I wanted to stay. Go to your daughter, Victoria said firmly. She needs you. I will be fine. He nodded once and was gone. The door closed behind him, and Victoria was alone again, surrounded by silence and expensive furniture, and the lingering scent of river water that still clung to her skin, no matter how many times she showered. She walked to the window and pressed her forehead against the cold glass, watching the city lights blur through her tears. People always leave when the truth is too much, she thought. And she had finally let someone see the truth, and he had left, just like everyone always did. The logical part of her brain knew it was not the same. He had left because his daughter was sick, not because of her scars. But the wounded child inside her, the little girl who had learned that love always came with loss, whispered that this was just the first step. He would realize what a mess she was. He would decide she was not worth the trouble. He would disappear from her life as quickly as he had entered it. Victoria wrapped her arms around herself and let the tears fall. The next 3 days were a blur of terror and exhaustion for Danny. He barely left Emma's hospital room, sleeping in the uncomfortable vinyl chair beside her bed, waking every time the monitors beeped or a nurse came in to check her vitals. The ear infection had spread faster than anyone expected. What had started as a chronic problem, something Emma had dealt with since she was a toddler, had turned into something potentially life-threatening. The doctors spoke in calm, measured tones about possible complications. Meningitis, permanent hearing loss, the need for immediate surgery, and Danny nodded through it, all his hand never leaving Emma's small one. She was so brave, his little girl. She colored pictures with her free hand, the one that was not connected to an IV, even as tears rolled down her cheeks from the pain. She asked about the pretty lady from the river and whether she was feeling better now. She talked to her mommy in heaven, asking Kate to help the doctors make her feel better. Danny held himself together for her sake, smiling when she needed smiles, telling stories when she needed distraction, holding her when the fear got too big for her small body to contain. But every time he looked at her pale face, guilt twisted in his chest like a knife. If he had not stopped by the river that evening, if he had taken her straight home instead of lingering for fresh air and memories, maybe none of this would have happened. The cold from standing around while her daddy played hero, the stress of watching a stranger nearly die, the disruption to her routine, any of it could have weakened her immune system just enough to let the infection take hold. And woven through the guilt was Victoria, her trembling voice echoing in his memory. The scars he had glimpsed raised and jagged against her pale skin, the way she had looked at him like he held the power to break her completely. He had wanted to stay that night. He had wanted to hold her and tell her that she was beautiful scars, and all that she was more than her wounds, that she deserved to be loved by someone who could see all of her. But he had left. He had had no choice, but he had still left. And now, even as he sat vigil at his daughter's bedside, part of his mind kept drifting back to that penthouse, to the woman who was probably convincing herself right now that she had made a mistake by letting him in. Victoria, meanwhile, could not settle. Her penthouse, usually a sanctuary of clean lines and quiet luxury, felt cavernous and cold. She walked from room to room in bare feet, wrapping her arms around herself as if to hold the pieces together, drinking tea that went cold before she finished it. Starting books, she could not concentrate on trying to work, but finding that numbers and spreadsheets meant nothing when her mind kept replaying the same scenes over and over. Danny's arms pulling her from the current, the strength in his shoulders as he hauled her to shore, the gentleness in his eyes when he looked at her scars, and then the phone call that tore him away at the worst possible moment. She kept checking her phone, hoping for a message that never came. She drafted texts and deleted them. She told herself it was ridiculous to be this affected by someone she had known for less than 12 hours, that she was Victoria Ashford, CEO and survivor, and she did not need anyone. But the crack in her armor was widening every hour, and she could not seem to do anything to stop it. On the third night, unable to bear the silence any longer, Victoria drove to the hospital. She told herself it was only to check on the child who had witnessed everything, the little girl with the curly brown hair, who had hugged her legs and told her to feel better. But deep down, she knew better. She needed to see Danny. She needed to know he was okay. She needed to prove to herself that she had not imagined everything. She wore a simple coat over jeans, her hair tied back in a ponytail. No makeup, no jewelry. Nothing like the polished CEO who commanded boardrooms and inspired fear. At the pediatric ward desk, she gave Emma's name, half expecting to be turned away. Instead, the nurse smiled softly and pointed down the hall. Victoria's heart pounded as she approached the door, left slightly ajar. Through the gap, she could see Danny slumped in the vinyl chair, his head resting on the bed rail near Emma's pillow. His dark hair was disheveled, his face unshaven and pale with exhaustion, and Emma's tiny hand was curled in his hair, holding on to her daddy even in sleep. The sight hit Victoria like a physical blow. The love in that image, the quiet devotion of a father who would give anything for his daughter, was something Victoria had never known. Her own father had loved her, she was sure of that. But he had been taken from her before she was old enough to really understand what that love meant. And her aunt had never looked at her the way Danny looked at Emma, like she was the center of the universe, the reason for breathing. Victoria stood frozen in the doorway, and tears filling her eyes until Danny stirred and looked up. Surprise flickered across his tired features, then something warmer, softer, something that looked almost like relief. "You came," he whispered, careful not to wake Emma. "I needed to know she was okay," Victoria replied, her voice barely audible. "And I needed to know you were." He stood slowly, his joints stiff from days of sitting in that uncomfortable chair, and stepped into the hallway, pulling the door almost closed behind him. For a long moment, they simply looked at each other under the harsh fluorescent lights. Two people who had been broken by life and were maybe possibly starting to find their way back to something that felt like wholeness. Then Danny spoke, his voice rough with fatigue and emotion. "I'm sorry I left that night," he said. "I wanted to stay. I wanted to tell you that you're beautiful, scars and all. I wanted to hold you and make you understand that you're more than what happened to you." He stopped, rubbing a hand over his face. But Emma spiked a fever out of nowhere. "I did not even think. I just ran." "I know," Victoria said quickly. "I know you had to go. I thought maybe once you saw." Her voice trailed off, but Danny understood. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the gold flecks in his hazel eyes, even in the dim light. "Victoria, those scars do not change how I see you. They're proof you survived something that would have destroyed most people. If anything, they make me admire you more." He reached out slowly, giving her time to pull away, and brushed a stray tear from her cheek with his thumb. His calloused skin was rough against her face, but his touch was gentle, almost reverent. "I've been thinking about you every minute I was not worrying about Emma," he admitted. "And I think she's been thinking about you too. She keeps asking about the pretty lady from the river." Victoria let out a shaky breath, leaning into his touch, just slightly, allowing herself to feel something other than cold and alone for the first time in days. "I've been thinking about you too," she whispered. "About both of you." They stood like that for several minutes, close enough to touch, close enough to breathe the same air, while the hospital corridor stayed quiet and dark around them. The night shift had settled into its rhythm, nurses moving between rooms on soft-soled shoes monitors, beeping their steady reassurance, the whole floor wrapped in that particular hush that only hospitals have in the small hours. "She's finally sleeping peacefully," Danny said, glancing back at Emma's door. "Surgery is scheduled for tomorrow morning. The specialist says she should come through fine, but there's always a risk with anesthesia, with infections that have spread this far." He trailed off, and Victoria saw the fear he was trying to hide, the terror of losing another person he loved. She knew that fear intimately. She had lived with it every day since Christmas Eve when she was 10 years old. "She's going to be okay," Victoria said with more certainty than she felt. "She has you fighting for her. That counts for a lot." Danny nodded, but his eyes were still shadowed, and then his expression shifted, became curious and almost hesitant. "The anonymous donor who covered all her medical bills," he said slowly. "The specialist they brought in from Portland, the private room, the round-the-clock care that I could not have afforded in 100 years. That was you, was it not?" Victoria looked down, feeling heat rise to her cheeks. "I made some calls. Victoria, I could not let her suffer when I could help," she said quietly. Still not meeting his eyes. "You saved my life." It felt right to try to save hers. Danny shook his head, a small, odd smile breaking through the exhaustion on his face. "You did not have to hide it. You did not have to pretend it was anonymous. I was afraid you'd feel indebted," Victoria admitted, "or that you'd think I was trying to buy something. Your gratitude or your silence or—" She forced herself to look at him. "I did not want you to feel obligated to feel anything for me." Danny stepped closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, close enough that she had to tilt her head back to meet his eyes. "Victoria." He said her name gently, firmly, like it was a statement rather than a question. "The only thing I feel is grateful, and maybe a little in awe of you." She did not know what to say to that. Nobody had ever looked at her the way Danny was looking at her now, like she was something precious and rare, like her kindness had surprised and moved him in equal measure. They found a quiet corner of the waiting room, two hard plastic chairs pushed together near a window that looked out over the parking lot. The vending machine hummed in the corner, casting a faint blue glow over their faces. And they talked until the early hours of the morning, sharing stories and secrets that neither of them had spoken aloud in years. Victoria told Danny more about the fire details she had never shared with anyone, the way the smoke had stung her eyes and throat, the heat that had radiated from the walls as she crawled toward her parents' room, the sound of the roof collapsing, a thunderous crash that still echoed in her nightmares, the endless months in the burn unit, the skin grafts that left her screaming in agony, the infections that nearly killed her twice, and the aftermath, the cold aunt who looked at her like a burden, the whispers at school when other children saw the edges of her scars peeking out from under her collar, the boys who asked her to prom as a joke, the girls who pretended to be her friends until they found someone more interesting. The survival mechanisms she had developed over the years achieve build walls so high that no one could ever get close enough to hurt her again. "I've never let anyone see me," Victoria admitted as the sky outside the window began to lighten. "Not really. I've had lovers who did not know about the scars because I always found ways to hide them. I've had friends who did not know about the fire because I changed the subject every time it came up. I became Victoria Ashford, the Ice Queen, because it was easier than being Victoria Ashford, the damaged orphan who could not save her parents." Danny listened without judgment, without trying to fix anything or offer platitudes. He just listened, his tired hazel eyes steady on her face, his hand occasionally reaching out to squeeze hers when the memories got too painful. And then he shared his own story the night Kate died, in more detail than he had given her before. "She was so excited about the baby," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "We'd been trying for years to give Emma a sibling, and when she finally got pregnant, she was over the moon. She decorated the nursery months before the due date had names picked out for both a boy and a girl. Talked to the baby every night, like he could already understand her." He paused, swallowing hard. The pregnancy was healthy. Every checkup was perfect. The doctors had no concerns. And then she went into labor 3 weeks early and everything just... He made a helpless gesture with his hands. It went wrong so fast. I was in the delivery room holding her hand, and 1 minute she was fine, and the next minute there was blood everywhere and doctors shouting and alarms going off. Victoria squeezed his hand, feeling her own tears sliding down her cheeks. "She died on the operating table," Danny continued. "They tried to save Thomas, our son, but the cord was wrapped around his neck. He was gone before they even got him out." His voice broke. "I had to go home that night and tell our daughter that her mommy and the baby brother she'd been so excited to meet were never coming home. She was 2 years old. She did not understand. She kept asking when mommy would come back for 6 months. "Danny," Victoria whispered, but she did not know what else to say. "Some days I feel guilty for being happy," he admitted. "Like I'm betraying Kate by moving on, by having good days, by letting myself care about someone new." He looked at Victoria, and the vulnerability in his eyes made her heart ache. "But I think she'd want me to live. She'd want me to love again. She was the least selfish person I ever knew. She would not want me to spend the rest of my life alone." When dawn began to lighten the windows, casting pale pink light across the waiting room, Danny walked Victoria to the elevator. "Will you come tomorrow?" he asked, his voice hesitant but hopeful. "For the surgery, it would mean a lot to Emma. And to me." Victoria looked at this man who had saved her life, and then, without expecting anything in return, let her help save his daughters. This man who had seen her scars and called them proof of survival. This man who had shared his deepest pain and allowed her to share hers. "I will be here," she promised. "I will be here." The morning of the surgery, Victoria arrived at the hospital before the sun was fully up, carrying 2 large cups of coffee and a soft teddy bear, wearing a purple bow that she had bought from the gift shop downstairs. She was not sure if Emma liked teddy bears, but the bear had kind eyes and looked like it gave good hugs, and Victoria had learned long ago that sometimes The smallest gestures meant the most. Danny was already in Emma's room, sitting on the edge of her bed, while a nurse checked her vitals one last time. His face was pale with exhaustion and worry, but when he saw Victoria in the doorway, something in his expression lifted like a weight had been partially removed from his shoulders just by her presence. "Look who's here, sweetheart," he said softly, nudging Emma. The little girl turned her head on the pillow, her curly brown hair matted from sleep, her face too pale and her eyes too bright with fever. But when she saw Victoria, a huge smile spread across her face, revealing the gap where her front tooth had fallen out. "You're the pretty lady from the river," Emma exclaimed, her voice weak but genuinely excited. "Daddy said you were really brave and swam in the cold water. I was scared for you." Victoria felt her throat tighten as she approached the bed. "I was scared too," she admitted, sitting down in the chair Danny had pulled over for her. "But your daddy saved me, and now I wanted to come and make sure you're okay. I brought you a friend." She held out the teddy bear. "His name is... well, I thought maybe you could name him." Emma's eyes went wide as she reached for the bear, hugging it immediately to her chest. "He's so soft. Can I really keep him?" "He's yours forever," Victoria promised. "I'm gonna name him River," Emma decided after a moment of serious contemplation. "Because that's where Daddy saved you, and now you're saving me by being here." Victoria had to blink rapidly to keep the tears from falling. This child, this sweet, brave, impossibly perceptive child, had just reached inside her chest and grabbed her heart with both hands. The next hour passed quickly as they waited for the surgical team to come. Victoria helped Danny distract Emma, telling stories about her work edited heavily for a 6-year-old audience, playing simple games with the flashlight app on her phone, teaching Emma how to make shadow puppets on the wall. When the nurses finally came to wheel Emma away, the little girl's face crumpled with fear. She grabbed Danny's hand with one hand and reached for Victoria with the other. "Will you both be here when I wake up?" she asked, her voice trembling. "We will be right here," Danny promised, kissing her forehead. "Both of us. We're not going anywhere." "Promise." "I promise," Victoria said, surprising herself with the conviction in her voice. "I will be here, Emma. I promise." Emma nodded once, clutching River the teddy bear to her chest as the nurses began wheeling her bed toward the operating room. She looked so small against the white sheets, so fragile, and Victoria felt a fierce, protective surge in her chest that she did not quite understand. The waiting room was quieter now, most of the overnight visitors having gone home. Danny and Victoria sat side by side in the hard plastic chairs, their shoulders almost touching a styrofoam cup of cold coffee clutched in Danny's hands. "Thank you for being here," he said quietly. "You did not have to come." "Yes, I did," Victoria replied, and realized it was true. "I wanted to be here. I needed to be here." They talked about easier things to pass the time. Favorite movies. Danny liked classic westerns. Victoria preferred documentary films. Best childhood memories. Danny building a treehouse with his father Victoria, baking cookies with her mother one Christmas the year before the fire. Foods they loved. Danny was partial to a good cheeseburger. Victoria admitted to a secret addiction to French fries, eaten cold from the container the next morning. Kate used to make the best pancakes, Danny said, at one point a sad smile crossing his face. She had this secret recipe that she swore her grandmother brought over from Ireland. I tried to recreate them after she died, but they never taste quite the same. "Maybe you will teach me someday," Victoria said, and then immediately wondered if she had overstepped. But Danny just looked at her with something warm and surprised in his hazel eyes. "Yeah," he said softly. "Maybe I will." 3 hours later, the surgeon emerged through the double doors, pulling off his cap to reveal a head of gray hair and tired but smiling eyes. "Mr. Mitchell, Emma's surgery went beautifully. We were able to clear the infection without any complications. She's going to make a full recovery." The relief that flooded Danny's face was something Victoria would never forget. He sagged in his chair like a puppet whose strings had been cut, and Victoria reached out instinctively, wrapping her arm around his shoulders as tears streamed down his cheeks. "She's okay," he kept saying over and over. "She's okay. She's okay. She's okay." When they were finally allowed to see Emma, the little girl was groggy, but smiling. River the teddy bear still clutched in her arms. She blinked up at them with unfocused eyes, and her first words were, "You stayed. Both of you. You promised, and you stayed." Over the next week, as Emma recovered in the hospital, and then at home, Victoria visited every day. She brought books and small toys, read stories in funny voices, until Emma giggled. Learned what foods Emma liked. Macaroni and cheese, apple slices, anything with peanut butter, and what she refused to eat anything green, anything that looked weird, anything that touched anything else on the plate. She watched Danny with his daughter, saw the way he anticipated her needs before she voiced them, the way he turned bath time into an adventure and bedtime into a story time that stretched longer than it should have, but filled the room with warmth. And she felt something she had not felt in years, maybe decades. She felt like she might be finding her way home. The day Emma was discharged from the hospital, Victoria insisted on driving them home. Her sleek black car looked comically out of place in the hospital's loading zone, surrounded by minivans and practical sedans, but Emma thought it was the coolest thing she had ever seen. "It's like a spaceship," she exclaimed as she climbed into the backseat. River, the teddy bear, buckled in beside her. "Does it go really fast? Can we go really fast?" "Maybe not today, sweetheart," Danny said with a laugh, catching Victoria's eye over the roof of the car. "Let's get you home first and see how you're feeling." Danny's apartment was a modest 2-bedroom on the 3rd floor of an older building, the kind of place where the walls were thin and the elevator broke down once a month. But the neighbors knew each other's names, and the landlord brought cookies at Christmas. It was nothing like Victoria's gleaming penthouse, but as soon as she walked through the door, she understood why Danny loved it. Emma's drawings were taped to every available surface. A crayon family portrait on the refrigerator. Daddy Emma and she was startled to see a figure labeled Miss Tory with yellow hair. A construction paper butterfly on the bathroom mirror. A glitter-covered attempt at a landscape above Emma's bed. Photos of Kate were everywhere too, not in a shrine-like way, but naturally integrated into the fabric of their daily lives. Kate holding newborn Emma. Kate and Danny on their wedding day. Kate laughing at something off-camera, her brown hair blown by the wind, her eyes full of love. "This is home," Danny said almost apologetically, watching Victoria take it all in. "I know it's not much compared to—" "It's perfect," Victoria interrupted and meant it. "It feels like people actually live here, like there's love in the walls." Danny looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable in his hazel eyes. "There is," he said quietly. "Or there was. Sometimes it feels like Kate left love behind when she went, and Emma and I have been living off of it ever since." Victoria helped carry Emma's things inside, then insisted on stocking Danny's refrigerator with groceries she had bought on the way over. Real food, not the frozen dinners and canned soup that were all she could see in his pantry. Fresh vegetables and fruit, milk and juice, ingredients for actual meals. "You do not have to do this," Danny said, watching her organize his kitchen with the efficiency of someone who was used to running a company. "I know," Victoria replied, "but I want to." That evening, after Emma was settled into her own bed, with River tucked under her arm, and a story about a princess who rescued a dragon, Emma insisted the dragon was the one who needed saving. Danny cooked a simple meal: grilled chicken, roasted vegetables. Nothing fancy, but the kitchen smelled amazing, and Victoria found herself standing at the counter watching him work with a contentment she did not quite know how to name. Kate used to do all the cooking, Danny admitted, flipping the chicken with practiced ease. "After she died, I lived on takeout and cereal for months. Then Emma got old enough to notice, and I realized I needed to learn how to feed my kid actual food. So I started experimenting. Most of it was terrible at first, and now he grinned a real grin that transformed his tired face into something almost boyish. Now it's only occasionally terrible. They ate on his small balcony, 2 folding chairs wedged between potted plants that had clearly seen better days. The city spread out below them, lights beginning to twinkle as the sun set, and Victoria realized this was the first time she had ever eaten dinner with someone who cooked for her just because they wanted to. "I've never had this," she said quietly. Her fork paused halfway to her mouth. Danny looked at her questioningly. A home-cooked meal with someone who... She hesitated, searching for the right words. With someone who actually cares. All my adult life it's been business dinners and charity galas, restaurant food catering, always performing, never just being. "Well," Danny said, setting down his own fork and meeting her eyes with a warmth that made her stomach flutter. "You're welcome here anytime you want to just be." Victoria did not know what to say to that, so she just smiled and took another bite of chicken, which really was delicious, and watched the last light fade from the sky, while something tight and cold in her chest slowly began to thaw. When it was time for her to leave, Danny walked her to the door. They stood in the narrow hallway, closer than they needed to be, the sounds of neighbors' televisions muffled through the thin walls. "Thank you," Danny said, "for everything, for being there for Emma, for the groceries, for..." He laughed softly. "For sitting on my crappy balcony eating my mediocre cooking." "It was not mediocre," Victoria protested. "It was good." "Yeah," his eyes crinkled at the corners. "Maybe next time I will make pancakes. Kate's recipe. I'd like that." She turned to go, but Danny's voice stopped her. "Victoria," she looked back over her shoulder. "I'm glad you came to the hospital that night," he said quietly. "I'm glad you did not let me push you away." Victoria felt tears prick at her eyes. "Me too," she whispered. "Me too." That night, lying in her cold penthouse bed, staring at the ceiling while the city hummed outside, Victoria thought about the way Emma had drawn her into their family portrait. The way Danny had looked at her across the balcony. The way for the first time in 25 years, she did not feel quite so alone. Her phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from Danny. "Emma's asleep. She asked if Miss Tori is coming back tomorrow." Victoria smiled in the darkness. "Tell her yes," she typed back. "And I'm bringing French fries." Raymond Cross had worked at Ashford Development for nearly 30 years. He had started as an entry-level accountant when Victoria's father, Richard Ashford, was still running the company from a cramped office above a hardware store. He had risen through the ranks by working longer hours than anyone else, by making himself indispensable, by learning every secret the company had, and filing them away for future use. When Richard died of a heart attack 15 years ago, Raymond had fully expected to be named CEO. He had the experience, the knowledge, the relationships with every major client and investor. He had given his entire adult life to this company. Instead, the board had chosen Victoria, Richard's orphaned daughter, the girl with the scars and the cold eyes and the MBA from Harvard, the girl who had only been working at the company for 3 years, who had never gotten her hands dirty, who had inherited everything Raymond had spent decades earning. He had hidden his fury well. He had smiled and congratulated her and played the role of loyal second-in-command. But inside, the resentment had grown like a cancer, eating away at him year after year, fed by every slight he perceived, every decision she made, without consulting him every time she looked at him with those ice-blue eyes, and made him feel small. And now, finally, he had found his weapon. A private investigator he had hired 3 months ago had uncovered everything. The fire that killed her parents, the months in the burn unit, the skin grafts and the surgeries and the scars that Victoria hid from the world behind high-collared blouses and careful armor. He had photographs of the burned house medical records that should have been sealed police reports that detailed exactly how the Ashfords had died while their 10-year-old daughter crawled through flames trying to save them. It was perfect. Beautiful. The Ice Queen's darkest secret ready to be exposed to the world. Raymond had contacts at several major publications, journalists who owed him favors, editors who knew that controversy sold papers. He had carefully planted the seeds framing the story as inspirational when what he really wanted was humiliation. He wanted Victoria to be stripped of the armor she had spent 25 years building. He wanted the world to see her as he saw her damaged goods, unworthy of the empire her father had built. At the charity gala, he had tested the waters approaching Victoria near the bar, while she nursed a glass of champagne. Lovely event, he had said, his smile never reaching his eyes. Your father would be proud of how far you've come. Victoria had tensed slightly, the way she always did when Raymond mentioned Richard. Thank you, Raymond. It must have been difficult, he continued, lowering his voice. Building yourself up from nothing. Well, not nothing, but from tragedy. Overcoming what happened to your family. He had watched her face, carefully looking for cracks in her composure, and he had seen them. The slight widening of her eyes, the tightening of her jaw, the almost imperceptible flinch at the word tragedy. I'm not sure what you mean, she said coolly, but he knew she knew. Oh, I just mean that everyone has skeletons in their closet, Raymond said, still smiling that snake's smile, and you've done such a remarkable job of keeping yours buried. For now. He had walked away then, leaving her standing there with fear flickering behind her icy facade. He did not need to say more. The seed was planted. The article would do the rest. 1 month later, just as Victoria was beginning to believe that maybe, just maybe, she could have something good in her life, the article dropped. It appeared online first on a major tech news site that regularly covered Ashford Development's business dealings. From ashes to boardroom, the tragic past of tech's Ice Queen. The headline was designed to sound sympathetic, but the content was pure sensationalism. There were photos of the burned house, charred beams and collapsed walls frozen forever in black and white. Details about the Christmas lights that had sparked the fire, about the parents who had died in their bedroom while their daughter burned. Medical records describing the extent of Victoria's injuries, the number of surgeries, the months of painful recovery, and speculation. So much speculation about how her cold leadership style must be overcompensation for her trauma, about whether someone so damaged could really be trusted to run a major corporation, about what other secrets she might be hiding. The comments section was worse. No wonder she always looks like she has a stick up her rear, one commenter wrote. She's probably covered in scars under those expensive suits. I heard from someone who works there that she never takes off her jacket even when it's hot, another added. Now we know why. Freak show someone else contributed. How did she even become CEO? Oh, right, Daddy's money. On and on and on, hundreds of comments, each one a knife. Victoria read them all. She sat in her penthouse office, the city lights spreading out below her like scattered diamonds, and she read every single cruel word that strangers had written about her most painful memories. She read until her eyes burned and her chest ached, and the walls she had built so carefully over 25 years began to crack and crumble. And then she shut down. Danny knew something was wrong when Victoria did not answer his call that evening. She had been answering every call, every text for the past month. They had fallen into a rhythm, a comfortable pattern of communication that felt natural and necessary. Texts throughout the day, calls at night after Emma went to bed, plans for dinners and weekend outings, and moments stolen between work and parenting. But that night, his call went to voicemail after 2 rings. His text received no reply. His follow-up call the next morning went unanswered. He tried to tell himself there was a reasonable explanation. She was busy. She had meetings. Her phone died. But a sick feeling in his stomach told him something else was going on. On the second day of silence, Jake Morrison, Danny's best friend and co-worker on the construction site, pulled him aside during lunch break. Hey man, Jake said, his normally jovial face unusually serious. "Have you seen this article about your girlfriend?" Danny's heart dropped. "What article?" Jake pulled out his phone and handed it over. Danny read the headline first, then the article, then the comments. He read it all while his lunch grew cold on the table beside him, and the sick feeling in his stomach transformed into something else entirely. Fury. Not at Victoria. Never at Victoria. At whoever had done this to her. Because someone had done this. This was not an organic discovery by an enterprising journalist. This was a deliberate exposure, a calculated attack designed to hurt her in the deepest way possible. Someone had dug up her most painful memories and displayed them for the whole world to mock. "I have to go," Danny said, already on his feet. "Go where Jake called after him." "Danny, our shift does not end for 4 hours." But Danny was already running toward his truck. He drove straight to Ashford Development headquarters, a gleaming tower of glass and steel that he had helped build 3 years ago. The security guard at the front desk recognized him from the construction days and let him through without question. Victoria's assistant, a kind-faced woman in her 60s named Margaret, was standing guard outside her office door like a sentinel. "She's not seeing anyone, Mr. Mitchell," Margaret said, but her eyes were red-rimmed and worried. "She will see me," Danny replied with more confidence than he felt. Margaret studied him for a long moment. "You're the one from the river," she said finally. "The one who saved her. I'm the one who's not going to let her face this alone." Something shifted in Margaret's expression. She stepped aside. "She has not eaten in 2 days. She has not slept. I've never seen her like this." Danny nodded once and pushed open the door. Victoria's office was dark, the blinds drawn against the afternoon sun. She sat at her desk, but she was not working. She was staring at her computer screen, at the article that had destroyed her, her face blank and empty in the monitor's glow. "Victoria." She did not look up. "How did you get in here?" "I told security I was here to fix a leak." He crossed the room and crouched beside her chair. "Victoria, look at me. Do not." Her voice was flat, emotionless. "Do not look at me like that. Do not feel sorry for me. I do not need your pity." "This is not pity," Danny said firmly. "This is me being here for someone I care about." Finally, she turned to look at him, and what he saw in her eyes broke his heart. Not the Ice Queen, not the untouchable CEO, just a wounded 10-year-old girl looking out from a woman's face, waiting for another person to abandon her. "You should go," she said quietly. "You should take Emma and go find someone normal, someone without all this damage." "Victoria, did you read the comments?" Her voice cracked. "Did you see what they said about me? Freak show. Damaged goods. That's what people see when they look at me. That's what you're going to see eventually. Everyone does." Danny stood up, walked around her desk, and turned her chair to face him. Then he knelt again so their eyes were level. "Listen to me," he said, his voice low and intense. "I do not care what strangers on the internet think. I do not care what this article says. I know who you are. I've seen you hold my daughter's hand before surgery. I've seen you read her stories until she fell asleep. I've seen you laugh and cry and be more real than anyone I've ever met." He took her hands in his calloused fingers wrapping around her cold ones. "You are not damaged goods. You are a survivor, and I am not going anywhere." Victoria stared at him, tears spilling down her cheeks. "You do not understand. Everyone leaves. Everyone always leaves when they see the truth. Then I will be the first one who does not." She broke then completely and utterly the sobs she had been holding back for 3 days, finally breaking free. Danny gathered her into his arms and held her while she cried, her face buried against his shoulder, her body shaking with 25 years of accumulated grief and fear. That evening, he did not leave her alone. He called Mrs. Chen to pick Emma up from school, explained that there was an emergency, promised to be home as soon as he could. And then he drove Victoria to his apartment because she could not bear to be in her empty penthouse and because Emma would be there. And somehow the presence of that little girl made everything better. When Emma saw Victoria come through the door, her face tear-stained and exhausted. The little girl did not hesitate. She ran across the living room and threw her arms around Victoria's legs. "We missed you, Miss Tori," Emma said simply. "Daddy said you were sad. I made you a picture so you would not be sad anymore." She held up a piece of construction paper covered in hearts and butterflies and flowers with the words, "I love you, Miss Tori," written in crooked 6-year-old letters across the top. Victoria's composure, what little she had rebuilt on the drive over, cracked all over again. She knelt down and pulled Emma into a fierce hug, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you, sweetheart," she whispered. "Thank you." Danny watched them together, his daughter, and this woman who had become so important to both of them, and felt something settle in his chest. This was right. This was where they were all supposed to be. He stepped forward and closed the door behind him. "You do not have to go through this alone," he said quietly. "Let us stand with you." That night they talked until sunrise again. Emma fell asleep on the couch between them, her small body curled around River the teddy bear, her breath slow and peaceful. Danny covered her with a blanket and tucked a pillow under her head, and then he and Victoria retreated to the kitchen, where they sat at his small table with cups of tea that grew cold between them. The article dragged me back to the worst moments Victoria admitted, her voice raw from crying. Reading those comments, it felt like being 10 years old again. Helpless, different, wrong. She wrapped her hands around her teacup, staring into the murky liquid. "When I went back to school after the hospital, the other kids used to whisper about me. They'd heard about the fire. Some of them had seen pictures of the burned house on the news. They'd stare at me like I was some kind of freak, and when they thought I could not hear them, they'd talk about my scars." Danny reached across the table and took her hand. "Kids can be cruel. Adults can be crueler." She laughed bitterly. At least children have the excuse of not knowing better. The people writing those comments, they're grown adults who chose to mock a woman for surviving a fire that killed her parents. They chose cruelty. "The people writing those comments do not know you," Danny said firmly. "They're hiding behind screens, taking out their own misery on someone they will never meet. Their opinions do not matter." "Then, whose opinions do matter?" He squeezed her hand. "Mine. Emma's. The people who actually know you, who see beyond the scars and the CEO title and the Ice Queen facade. We see you, Victoria, the real you, and we think you're pretty amazing." Victoria looked at him across the small table, at his tired hazel eyes and his calloused hands and his steady, unwavering presence. He had seen her at her absolute worst, crying and broken and terrified, and he was still here. He had not run away. He had not looked at her with pity or disgust. "How do you do it?" she asked quietly. "How do you stay so steady when everything around you is falling apart?" Danny was quiet for a moment, considering the question. "I do not know if I do," he admitted. "After Kate died, I felt like I was drowning most of the time. Like the grief was this ocean I was trapped in, and every time I tried to swim to the surface, another wave would pull me under. But you kept swimming. I had to. I had Emma. She needed me to keep going even when I did not want to." He looked toward the living room where his daughter slept peacefully. "Kids do not let you wallow. They need breakfast and bedtime stories and someone to fix their boo-boos. They force you to keep moving, even when every step feels impossible." "I did not have that," Victoria said softly. "I did not have anyone who needed me. So I threw myself into work instead. Built walls. Became someone no one could hurt. But people did hurt you anyway." "Yes." She closed her eyes. "Yes, they did." They sat in silence for a while, the quiet of the early morning, wrapping around them like a blanket. Through the kitchen window, the first hints of dawn were beginning to lighten the sky. "Look at Emma," Danny said, finally. "She's living proof that love can grow in the aftermath of pain. She lost her mother before she ever really knew her, but she's still the most loving, joyful kid I've ever met. She trusts people. She believes in good things. She has not let the tragedy of her birth define her." Victoria opened her eyes and looked at the sleeping child. She's remarkable. She is. And so are you. Danny met her gaze. The people who matter see your strength, Victoria, not your scars. The people who matter love you because of who you are not in spite of it. Do you? The question came out before she could stop it. Love me. Danny's expression softened. I think I've been falling in love with you since the moment you opened your eyes on that riverbank and looked at me like I was the only solid thing in the universe. Victoria felt tears slip down her cheeks again, but these were different. These were tears of hope, of healing, of something that felt dangerously like happiness. I think I've been falling in love with you too, she whispered, and it terrifies me. That's okay, Danny said, pulling her into his arms. We can be terrified together. In the months that followed, they built something beautiful together. Not with grand gestures or dramatic declarations, but with small moments, ordinary magic, the daily choice to show up for each other and keep choosing each other over and over again. Victoria learned that healing was not linear. Some days were good days when she felt strong and brave and capable of conquering the world. Other days were harder days when the old fears crept back in, and she wanted to retreat behind her walls and shut everyone out. But Danny was there on the hard days too. He did not try to fix her, or rush her, or tell her how she should feel. He just stayed steady as a rock, reminding her that she was not alone anymore. She started visiting the apartment regularly, not as a guest, but as a part of their family. She learned Emma's routine's breakfast at 7, school drop-off at 8, homework at 4, dinner, at 6, bath time, at 7:30 bedtime, at 8, with a story that always stretched to 8:30, because neither Emma nor Victoria wanted it to end. She learned to cook, or at least not to burn things standing beside Danny in his small kitchen while he taught her his late wife's secret pancake recipe. Kate used to add a tiny bit of vanilla extract at the very end, he explained, guiding Victoria's hand as she stirred the batter. And she'd let the batter rest for exactly 5 minutes before she started cooking. She said that was the secret. What if I mess it up? Victoria asked, anxiety creeping into her voice. She had run a billion-dollar company without breaking a sweat, but the thought of ruining Kate's pancakes filled her with dread. Danny smiled and wrapped his arms around her from behind. Then we will eat burnt pancakes and love them anyway. Emma stood on her step stool beside them, supervising the process with the seriousness of a head chef. Miss Torrey, you have to flip them when you see bubbles, she instructed. Daddy forgets sometimes, and they get all black on the bottom. I do not forget, Danny protested. I just get distracted. By what? By beautiful women standing in my kitchen, he said, kissing Victoria's cheek. Emma made a face. Gross. Can we eat pancakes now? The pancakes turned out slightly lopsided and a little too brown on one side, but Emma declared them the best pancakes in the whole world, and Victoria felt a warmth in her chest that had nothing to do with the stove. She surprised Emma with tickets to a children's theater production of The Little Mermaid, and watched the little girl's face light up with wonder as she saw her favorite story come to life on stage. She sat between Danny and Emma in the darkened theater, Emma's small hand in hers, and felt like she finally understood what people meant when they talked about family. Danny taught her to skip rocks at the river, the same river where he had pulled her from the water, transformed now from a place of near death into a place of laughter and light. They went there on Sunday afternoons, Emma running ahead to look for smooth stones, and Danny would stand behind Victoria and guide her arm in the proper skipping motion. It's all in the wrist, he said, his breath warm against her ear. See, like that. Her stone bounced 3 times across the surface before sinking. Emma cheered. Victoria felt like she had won an Olympic medal. They argued sometimes because real relationships have conflict and friction. About schedules, about parenting decisions, about whether Victoria was working too many hours or Danny was taking enough time for himself. But they always came back together, always talked it through, always chose understanding over anger. I'm not going anywhere. Danny would remind her when the old fears crept back. Not ever, and slowly, painfully, beautifully. Victoria began to believe him. Margaret Webb had been Victoria's executive assistant for 15 years. She had watched the young woman grow from a terrified new CEO into a confident leader, and she had guarded Victoria's secrets with the fierce loyalty of a mother protecting her child. She had known about the scars, of course. She had been the one to order the high-collared blouses to adjust the thermostat, so Victoria never had an excuse to remove her jacket to field questions from curious employees with vague explanations and pointed subject changes. And she had known, even before the article dropped, that someone inside the company was planning something terrible. Margaret had noticed the private investigator lurking around the building months ago. She had seen the strange man asking questions of lower-level employees digging for information that had nothing to do with business. She had reported her concerns to Victoria, but there had been no proof, nothing concrete to act on. Now, with the article published and Victoria devastated, Margaret decided it was time to do some digging of her own. She started with the journalist who had written the piece, a woman named Sandra Ellis, who specialized in human interest stories about corporate executives. A few discreet inquiries revealed that Sandra had been contacted by an anonymous source within Ashford Development, someone who had provided her with all the materials for the article, the photographs, the medical records, the police reports. Margaret knew how to keep records. She had been doing it for 30 years. And she knew that some of the documents in that article, particularly the medical records, were sealed and protected. Someone with significant resources and connections had obtained them illegally. She thought about who at the company would have both the motive and the means to orchestrate something like this. Raymond Cross. He had been bitter about being passed over for CEO for years. Margaret had seen the way he looked at Victoria in meetings, the contempt he could not quite hide behind his professional smile. She had heard the whispers about his connections in the media, the favors he called and the secrets he collected. She started digging, carefully, quietly, without telling anyone what she was doing. And what she found was worse than she had expected. Raymond had not just leaked the article. He had been undermining Victoria for years, falsified expense reports that made the company look unstable, embezzled funds funneled through shell companies, secret meetings with competitors to share proprietary information, a pattern of sabotage designed to damage Victoria's reputation and position himself as the savior who could fix the problems he had created. The evidence was overwhelming. Bank records, emails, recorded phone conversations that Raymond had apparently been too arrogant to delete. Margaret brought everything to Victoria on a Monday morning, her face grim but triumphant. "I found him," she said, laying the folder on Victoria's desk. "I found the source of the article, and I found a lot more besides." Victoria opened the folder and began to read. Her face went through a series of expressions: shock, anger, grief, and finally cold determination. "Call an emergency board meeting," she said quietly, "for this afternoon, and tell Raymond that his presence is required." The boardroom was full when Victoria walked in that afternoon. 12 board members, Raymond, Cross, and Margaret, who stood by the door like a sentinel. Raymond was already seated at the table looking smug and confident. He thought this meeting was about him finally pushing Victoria out. He thought his plan had worked. He was wrong. Victoria stood at the head of the table, her back straight, her eyes clear, her hands steady. Danny's words echoed in her mind. "You are not damaged goods. You are a survivor." "Thank you all for coming on such short notice," she said. "I know you've all seen the article that was published about me last month. I know it raised questions about my past and my fitness to lead this company." Raymond smirked. "Perhaps it's time to discuss succession planning," he suggested. "For the good of the company." Victoria ignored him. The article was accurate in its basic facts. She continued, "I was in a fire when I was 10 years old. My parents died. I was badly burned. I carry scars that I've hidden from the world my entire adult life." She paused, letting the truth hang in the air. "But I've realized something important. Those scars are not my shame. They are proof that I survived something that would have destroyed most people. They are evidence of my strength, not my weakness." She turned slightly, reached up, and lowered the collar of her blouse just enough to reveal the edges of the burn scars on her upper back. The board members stared, some with surprise, some with something that looked like respect. "I am not damaged goods," Victoria said firmly. "I am a survivor. I built this company from my father's legacy because I know what it means to lose everything and have to rebuild from nothing. That experience does not make me less qualified to lead. It makes me more qualified." Raymond's smug expression was beginning to falter. "This is all very touching," he said, "but sentiment does not change the facts. The company's reputation has been damaged. Someone needs to take responsibility." "I agree," Victoria said. "Someone does need to take responsibility." She nodded to Margaret, who stepped forward and distributed copies of the evidence folder to every board member. "Raymond Cross is the source of the article," Victoria announced, as the board members began to flip through the documents. "He hired a private investigator to dig up my past. He obtained sealed medical records illegally. He leaked everything to a journalist with the explicit intention of destroying my reputation." Raymond's face went pale. "This is ridiculous. I would never, but that's not all." Victoria continued, her voice steady and cold. "While investigating the leak, we discovered that Mr. Cross has been embezzling funds from this company for years. Hundreds of thousands of dollars funneled through shell companies. We also found evidence of falsified reports, sabotaged projects, and corporate espionage." The boardroom erupted. Raymond was on his feet shouting denials, but the evidence was overwhelming. Board members were reading through the documents with expressions of shock and anger. Someone called for security. When the security guards arrived, Raymond was escorted from the building, still protesting his innocence. His career at Ashford Development over in the space of an hour. Victoria watched him go and felt something release in her chest. Not triumph exactly, not satisfaction, just closure. The person who had tried to destroy her had been destroyed instead, not by cruelty or manipulation, but by the simple power of truth. After the meeting, the board members who remained approached Victoria one by one. Some apologized for ever doubting her. Others expressed their admiration for her courage. All of them confirmed their support for her continued leadership. When the boardroom finally emptied, Victoria sat alone at the long table, staring out the window at the city she had helped build. Margaret appeared in the doorway. "He's been handed over to the police," she said. "The FBI is interested in the embezzlement charges. He will not be bothering you again." Victoria nodded slowly. "Thank you, Margaret, for everything. It was my pleasure." Margaret smiled. "That man has been a thorn in my side for 15 years. Watching him get escorted out by security was the most satisfying moment of my career." The aftermath of Raymond's exposure rippled through Ashford Development like a stone dropped in still water. Employees who had sensed the tension, but never understood its source, finally had answers. The company culture, which had been tainted by Raymond's influence for years, began to shift towards something healthier and more honest. Victoria found herself changed too. The act of revealing her scars in that boardroom, of choosing vulnerability over armor, had unlocked something inside her. She stopped wearing the high-collared blouses that had been her uniform for decades. She talked more openly about her past, not dwelling on it, but not hiding from it either. She let people really see her for the first time in her adult life, and to her surprise, they did not run away. Instead, they came closer. Employees who had always feared the Ice Queen discovered a leader who was human, relatable, inspiring in ways they had not expected. Her authenticity became her greatest asset, not the weakness Raymond had counted on it being. One evening, a few weeks after the boardroom confrontation, Victoria was sitting on Danny's balcony, watching Emma chase fireflies in the small courtyard below. Danny appeared behind her with 2 glasses of wine and sat down in the folding chair beside hers. "You're different," he observed, handing her a glass. Good different, or bad different. Good different. He smiled. Lighter. Like you finally put down something heavy you've been carrying for a long time. Victoria considered this. I think I did, she said slowly. I spent 25 years hiding building walls, protecting myself from being hurt. But all that armor, it did not keep the pain out. It just kept me trapped inside with it. And now, I'm trying to live without the armor. She laughed softly. It's terrifying, honestly. But it's also freeing. They watched Emma in companionable silence for a while. The little girl had given up on catching fireflies and was now doing an elaborate dance in the courtyard river, the teddy bear held aloft as her partner. She asked me something yesterday, Danny said quietly. Victoria turned to look at him. What? She asked if you were going to be her new mommy someday. Victoria's breath caught. What did you tell her? Danny met her eyes, his expression soft and serious. I told her I hoped so. Tears pricked at Victoria's eyes. Danny, I know we've only known each other for a few months, he continued. And I know we've both been through things that make it hard to trust, hard to hope. But when I look at you, when I see you with Emma, when I think about what my life was like before you fell into that river, he took her hand. I cannot imagine going back to that. I do not want to. Victoria squeezed his hand, feeling something expand in her chest, something that felt a lot like joy. I cannot imagine going back either, she whispered. You and Emma, you're my family now. The family I thought I'd never have. Danny leaned over and kissed her gentle and sweet, while Emma danced in the courtyard below, and the fireflies blinked their tiny lights in the gathering dusk. When they pulled apart, Victoria was smiling. Whatever comes next, Danny said, his forehead resting against hers. We face it together. Together, Victoria agreed. Always together. 2 years passed, and they were the happiest years of Victoria's life. She and Danny had found their rhythm, a comfortable dance of shared responsibilities and stolen moments, and the kind of deep understanding that only comes from truly knowing another person. They had weathered storms together, the aftermath of the article, the challenges of blending their lives, the ordinary difficulties of any relationship, and they had emerged stronger each time. Emma was 8 now, a confident, curious, impossibly joyful child who had completely captured Victoria's heart. She still called Victoria Miss Tori most of the time, but occasionally in moments of great excitement or distress, she would slip and call her mommy. And every time it happened, Victoria felt like her heart might burst with love. Danny had been thinking about the proposal for months. He knew with a certainty that went bone deep that Victoria was the woman he wanted to spend the rest of his life with. But he also knew that after everything she had been through, after all the walls she had built, and the trust she had learned to give, the proposal had to be perfect. It had to mean something. He enlisted Emma as his co-conspirator, which turned out to be both a blessing and a curse. Emma was absolutely thrilled with the secret, but she was also absolutely terrible at keeping it. Is today the day, Daddy? She would whisper dramatically every morning. Are you going to ask her today? Patient, sweetheart, Danny would reply. We need the perfect moment. But when is the perfect moment? I will know it when I see it. They went shopping for the ring together, Danny and Emma, on a Saturday afternoon, while Victoria was at a conference in Portland. The jeweler, an elderly man with kind eyes and steady hands, watched them debate options with barely concealed amusement. What about this one? Daddy Emma pointed to a ring with a diamond the size of a marble. That one costs more than our apartment, sweetheart. But Miss Tori is worth 1,000,000 apartments. Danny could not argue with that logic. But he also knew Victoria well enough to know that she would not want something ostentatious. She had access to all the expensive things in the world, and what she valued most was simplicity, meaning heart. They finally settled on a ring that was elegant but understated, a single diamond, in a simple setting, classic and beautiful, the kind of ring that would look right on Victoria's hand for the next 50 years. It's perfect, Emma declared. Miss Tori is going to cry happy tears. I hope so, sweetheart. I really hope so. Danny chose the riverbank for the proposal. The same spot where he had pulled Victoria from the water 2 years ago. The same spot where Kate had loved to watch the sunset. The same spot where Emma threw flowers into the water every year for the mother she could not remember. It was a warm evening in late spring, the sky painted in shades of gold and pink, the river flowing gently past, as if it had never tried to claim anyone's life. Danny spread a blanket on the grass and unpacked a picnic basket that Emma had helped prepare, hiding the ring in a secret compartment at the very bottom. Victoria arrived at 6, wearing a simple sundress that showed the edges of her scars, and a smile that made Danny's heart flip over in his chest. She had learned to stop hiding, to let the world see her exactly as she was, and she had never been more beautiful. "This is lovely," she said, settling onto the blanket beside him. "What's the occasion?" "Does there need to be an occasion?" Danny asked, handing her a glass of wine. "With you?" "Usually, yes." She laughed. "You're not exactly spontaneous." Emma giggled from her spot on the other side of the blanket, and Victoria raised an eyebrow. "Okay, what are you two up to?" Danny took a deep breath. This was the moment. 2 years of falling in love, of building a life together, of learning to trust and be trusted, all leading to this. He got to his feet and then knelt on one knee before her, reaching into the picnic basket for the ring. Victoria's eyes went wide. "Danny!" 2 years ago, he said, his voice steady, despite the pounding of his heart. "I pulled a stranger from this river. I did not know her name. I did not know anything about her. I just knew that she was drowning. And I could not let her go." He opened the ring box, and the diamond caught the golden light of the sunset. But she was not a stranger for long. She became my friend, my partner, my love. She became the most important person in my life, besides this little one. He nodded toward Emma, who was bouncing up and down with barely contained excitement. She taught me that it's possible to love again after loss. She showed me that scars can be beautiful. She gave me hope when I thought I'd forgotten what hope felt like. Victoria's hands were pressed against her mouth, tears streaming down her face. "Victoria Ashford," Danny continued, "you are the bravest, strongest, most beautiful woman I've ever known, and I want to spend the rest of my life standing beside you, holding your hand, facing whatever comes next together." Emma could not contain herself any longer. "Say yes, Miss Tory," she burst out. "Say yes, say yes, say yes." Victoria laughed through her tears, reaching out to cup Danny's face in her hands. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, yes, 1,000 times yes." Danny slid the ring onto her finger, and then they were kissing, and Emma was cheering, and the river flowed gently past them. No longer a place of fear, but a place of joy, of new beginnings of love that had been tested and proven and found unshakable. The three of them stayed on the riverbank until the stars came out wrapped in blankets, and each other talking about the future. Wedding plans. Where they would live. Whether Emma wanted a brother or a sister. She wanted a puppy, actually, but she would settle for a sibling if necessary. It was Victoria thought the happiest night of her life. So far, the wedding was held by the river on a perfect day in late September, when the leaves were just beginning to turn, and the air was crisp with the promise of autumn. They had kept it intimate, just close friends, and the handful of family members who had proven themselves worthy of the word. Mrs. Chen was there, dabbing at her eyes with a handkerchief. Jake Morrison served as Danny's best man, looking uncomfortable in a suit, but grinning from ear to ear. Margaret Webb sat in the front row, her expression fierce with pride. The ceremony space was simple but beautiful. An arch covered in wildflowers chairs, arranged in neat rows on the grass, the river flowing gently behind the altar, as if blessing the proceedings. This was the spot where Danny had saved Victoria's life, and now it would be the spot where they pledged their lives to each other. Emma was the flower girl, a responsibility she took with the utmost seriousness. She walked down the aisle in her pretty dress, scattering rose petals with careful precision, River the teddy bear tucked under her arm, because some things were too important to leave behind. And then Victoria appeared at the end of the aisle, and Danny forgot how to breathe. Her dress was elegant and simple, exactly like her engagement ring, but what made it extraordinary was the back. Instead of the high-necked covered style she had worn for 25 years, this dress had an open back that revealed her scars to the world. She walked down the aisle with her head held high, her honey blonde hair cascading over her shoulders, her blue eyes fixed on Danny's face. And as she moved through the dappled sunlight, her scars caught the light like badges of honor, like proof of everything she had survived and overcome. Danny felt tears sliding down his cheeks and did not bother to wipe them away. When Victoria reached him, she took his hands and he could feel her trembling. "You're shaking," he whispered. "Good shaking," she whispered back. "Happy shaking." The officiant began the ceremony, but Danny barely heard the words. He was too busy looking at Victoria, drinking in every detail of this moment, storing it away in his memory, where he would keep it forever. When it came time for the vows, Danny went first. "Victoria," he said, his voice rough with emotion, "you taught me that love is brave enough to see the scars and stay anyway. You taught me that the heart does not stop being able to love just because it's been broken. You taught me that family is not about blood or biology. It's about choosing each other every day, over and over again." He squeezed her hands. "I choose you, Victoria. Today and tomorrow and every day after that. I choose your scars and your strength and your stubborn refusal to give up. I choose your laughter and your tears and your ridiculous addiction to cold French fries. I choose all of you exactly as you are, and I promise to keep choosing you for as long as I live." Victoria was crying openly now, but she was also smiling that radiant smile that transformed her whole face. "Danny," she said, her voice steady, "despite the tears, you pulled me from the water and taught me I was worth saving. You looked at my scars and saw beauty instead of damage. You opened your heart and your home and your daughter to me, and you gave me something I never thought I'd have: a family." She took a breath. "I spent 25 years building walls to keep people out. You did not climb those walls or tear them down. You just stood there patient and kind and steady, and you waited for me to open the door. And when I finally did, you walked in and made yourself at home." Danny laughed through his tears. "I love you," Victoria continued. "I love your kindness and your strength and your terrible cooking. I love the way you look at Emma, like she's the center of the universe. I love the way you look at me like I'm something precious and rare. I choose you, Danny Mitchell, today and forever. Now kiss her, Daddy." Emma stage whispered and the whole gathering laughed. The officiant smiled. "I believe that's my line, but I will allow it. You may kiss the bride." Danny pulled Victoria into his arms and kissed her deeply and thoroughly, while their friends and family cheered, and Emma bounced up and down with joy. When they finally pulled apart, Victoria was laughing and crying at the same time. "We're married," she said, as if she could not quite believe it. "We're married," Danny confirmed. "You're stuck with me now. I can live with that." The reception was held in the same spot, under strings of twinkling lights that Mrs. Chen had helped Danny hang the day before. There was food and music and dancing, and Emma was passed from lap to lap by adults who wanted to tell her what a wonderful job she had done as flower girl. Danny and Victoria danced their first dance as husband and wife to a song that had been Kate's favorite, a choice Danny had made deliberately, and Victoria had understood immediately. "She would have loved you," Danny murmured against Victoria's hair. "Kate, she would have loved you." "I hope so," Victoria whispered. "I hope I'm honoring her memory by loving you and Emma." "You are, every day." Later, as the party wound down and the stars came out over the river, Danny found Victoria standing alone at the water's edge, looking out at the moonlight reflecting on the surface. He came up behind her and wrapped his arms around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder. "Penny for your thoughts." Victoria leaned back against him, her hands covering his where they rested on her stomach. "I was thinking about the night you saved me," she said softly. "How scared I was. How certain I was that I was going to die alone. And now," she turned in his arms, her face tilted up to his. "Now I know that I'm never going to be alone again." Danny kissed her forehead, her nose, her lips. Never, he promised. Never again. 5 years after the wedding, on a warm summer evening, Danny found Victoria on the back porch of their new house, watching the children play in the yard. Emma was 13 now, tall and confident and impossibly beautiful, her curly brown hair tied back in a ponytail as she kicked a soccer ball with her little brother. Thomas was 4, a dark-haired boy with Victoria's blue eyes and Danny's quiet strength, named after the brother Emma had lost before she was born. Victoria had her hand resting on her belly, which was just beginning to swell with their 3rd child. Danny sat down beside her and took her hand, and for a long moment, they just watched their children together, listening to the sounds of laughter and playful arguing that filled their home every day. "Do you ever think about the river?" Victoria asked quietly. "All the time," Danny admitted. "I think about how close I came to driving past, how close you came to drowning, how different everything would be if I had not heard you scream." Victoria nodded slowly. "I think about it too. I think about the girl I was before that night, hiding behind walls, convinced I would never be loved." She squeezed his hand. "I'm grateful every day that you stopped. I'm grateful every day that you let me in." They sat in comfortable silence as the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. "Thank you," Victoria whispered. Danny turned to look at her. "For what?" "For staying." She met his eyes, and in her gaze he saw everything the scared woman who had asked if he would stay, if she undressed the survivor who had shown him her scars, the mother who had welcomed his daughter as her own, the wife who had built a life with him that exceeded every dream he had ever had. For seeing me, for loving me exactly as I am. Danny pulled her close, pressing a kiss to her temple. "Thank you for letting me," he whispered back. "Thank you for being brave enough to let me see." In the yard, Emma was showing Thomas how to do a cartwheel, and the little boy's attempts were making both of them laugh. The sunset cast long shadows across the grass, and somewhere in the distance, they could hear the river flowing gently past. Love does not ask us to hide our broken places. It holds them gently and patiently until they become part of something stronger and more beautiful than we ever imagined. Real courage is not building empires or diving into freezing water. It is choosing to stay when someone finally lets you see their deepest wounds. It is undressing the soul scars and all, and finding that true love only grows deeper in the light. Friends, if this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to our channel for more heartwarming tales. Drop a heart in the comments if you believe in second chances, and share this with someone who needs to remember that love can find us when we least expect it. We would love to hear from you, so tell us in the comments, have you ever experienced a moment that changed your life forever? Your story matters, and we cannot wait to read it.